The fifth fallacy that we're going to talk about in this series on logical fallacies is called the Over-Generalization Logical Fallacy. This one is sometimes also called hasty generalization. Kind of different, but they're essentially referring to the same thing. Basically, it's just jumping to conclusions. So overgeneralization implies that you took one thing and made it into a whole big thing that maybe it was undeserving of. Hasty generalization implies that you just did so quickly. Either way, we are actually talking about the same thing if you see something referred to as using either of those terms. Again, essentially just jumping to conclusions. Making a claim based on limited evidence, taking one experience of something or one incident of something, and then claiming that it applies to everything else. We do this a lot. In some ways, this helps us developmentally in order to sort out new experiences by linking them to experiences that we've had in the past. So in some ways, evolutionary-wise, we've been primed to do this, but it doesn't make it a sound basis for an argument. Another way that this is sometimes explained is that overgeneralization is basically saying that if X is true for A and B, then it is also true for C, D, and E. Right? Which we don't necessarily know. It could also be true for those other things, but just because it's true for these two doesn't mean necessarily that it's true for the rest. This is a logical fallacy because it makes a big claim out of a potentially isolated incident. It is based on the assumption that because something happened one time, it can and will happen again. Again, that's a possibility, but it is not sound enough, not logically strong enough in order to be a known thing that we can argue on. We're going to take a look at a couple of examples of overgeneralization that have come up a lot recently and in the past that I've heard. Common one, especially this summer, the argument that if there was looting at some Black Lives Matter protests, then all BLM protesters are dangerous and disruptive. This is a classic example of overgeneralization. We see an isolated incident, right? And then we see that being turned into something that applies to everybody, right? Even if this did happen more than once, it happening before in the past does not necessarily predict that it will happen again. It could happen again, that's absolutely correct, but it doesn't mean that it will, and so we can't necessarily form the basis of a strong argument off of this overgeneralization. Another example that comes up a lot is that if some people experience flu-like symptoms after receiving the flu shot, then the flu shot causes the flu, right? Again, we have overgeneralization because we have a somewhat unique experience, right? We have some people who might feel like they have a fever or any other symptoms, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every time anybody gets the flu shot, they are going to have the flu. So that is why these are both examples of overgeneralization. We have taken a small sample, we have taken an anecdotal level of experience that somebody had, and we have made it try to apply to everything ever. That is classic overgeneralization, and that is a logical fallacy.